Hello my dear sewing friends, and in this new video I have prepared for you 10 quick and easy sewing projects that are going to be perfect for using up your fabric scraps, for practicing your sewing skills, and of course for making something practical and useful for yourselves, as gifts for your loved ones, and even as something that you can use as sewing and selling for a little side hustle. You will see a variety of projects geared for knits and wovens, so if you have fabric scraps or fabric leftovers of both, this is going to be right up your alley, and I'm going to entice you to get creative and even do a little bit of pattern drafting. So we're going to cover a wide range of different sewing skills. Now the video isn't a longer side as usually these videos are, so you will find timestamps in the description of this video as well as in the pinned comment, so that way for your convenience you can find exactly the project that you've been looking for. For our first project, let's do something that perhaps you haven't seen before, and we are going to be making a pair of socks. That's right, we're going to be sewing socks. And it might seem like quite a gimmicky idea at the very beginning, I totally hear you. So we've been wearing them and testing them for over a week now, and the conclusion is, from both myself and my daughter, is that these are nice, comfortable, wearable socks. This is a great project for all of those knit fabric scraps that you might have, so that way you can use them up and in the process make something useful. But keep in mind that you will need knit fabric scraps that stretch in both directions, so horizontally and vertically. You can also do this project by hand on a sewing machine, but in today's particular video, we are going to be using a serger. If you're using a sewing machine, simply substitute my serger stitch for a zigzag or a lightning stitch, or perhaps any other stretch stitch that you can find on your sewing machine. Now the pattern that I'm using today is a free pattern by Ellie and Mac. It's a wonderful, brilliant pattern with lots of explanations, so definitely don't skip on those, read it through, and everybody can download this free pattern. You can find a link in the description right underneath this video. Now sometimes I get a comment that people don't know where the description of the video is, so you can just Google that and find it. Or alternatively, you can also type in free Ellie and Mac sock pattern in your web browser, and you'll be able to find and download this pattern without a problem. The file itself is quite large, but the pattern pieces are actually only on 4 pages, so you don't have to print everything out, just these 4. Once done, tape these together and assemble as per instructions in the file. After you have determined what size you need to cut, so in my case it's going to be size 13 for my daughter, we can either trace the pattern pieces that we need, or we can cut it straight from here. These are the pattern pieces that you're going to have after cutting everything out. Now, neither my daughter or I like long socks for the most part, so the ones that I'm going to be making are quite shorter than the ones that you're going to see as samples in the original pattern. All of the other steps are going to be exactly the same, but if you do want your socks on the shorter side, here's what you're going to do. Grab the pattern piece that reads front, from top, measure down the necessary amount by which you need to shorten your sock. In my case, it's going to be 8 centimeters or approximately 3 inches, and then draw a straight line. Then grab the pattern piece that reads back top and shorten it by exactly the same amount, and again draft a straight line. After that, simply cut off the unnecessary length, and that's it. You have adjusted your pattern. From here, grab your fabric and the pattern pieces, position them according to the markings on the patterns, then secure with pins and cut them out. Please note that it says here on the patterns that 1/4 inch seam allowance is already included. Now when you're cutting your pattern pieces, make sure that you also mark all of the little notches that you see on the patterns themselves. Now usually I would just snip into the fabric and mark the notches this way, but it's better in this particular case for this particular project to use a marking tool like a chalk or a washable marker. Now onto the assembly. First, let's set up our serger. Today we're going to be using a 3-thread serger technique instead of a regular 4-thread technique, and there are 2 reasons reasons why I decided to do that for this particular project. Number one, 3-thread technique is stretchier than a 4-thread technique. Therefore, the seam has more flexibility. Now, the difference is small. However, in projects like these, it does matter. Number two, 3-thread technique creates less bulk than a 4-thread technique, which in turn is going to give you a really nice round result right here in the toe area and at the heel, and it also creates less bulk for you to feel in the seam. And that was my number one concern when I was making these socks, because my daughter, she will tell you right away if something doesn't feel right, and so far she hasn't said a word, but instead she's been reaching for these socks every single day when she goes to school. So I would say that this definitely works, 3-thread technique, for those two reasons. To do this, you're going to start by removing your right needle. Once that is done, we're going to thread our serger as per usual, set up the tension as per usual. Everything else stays in, the stitch finger and the knife. And I'm going to replace one of my thread cones that goes into the left needle with a purple thread, but I will leave the rest of them white so that way you can see the seam on this example. Now, grab the pattern piece that says back bottom with the notches right over here facing up. Then grab the pattern piece that says back top with the notches facing down. For me, it's this little pattern piece because we did adjust the length of the sock. Now, place these right sides together, aligning at the curve and at the notches. So right here at the notches, what I want to do is I want to make a little mark right over here and a little mark right over here. So that way I know where to stop and start once we're at the serger. If you want, you can also pin right over here. At the serger, first start by chaining off. Then grab our project. Here's the little notch mark. Lift up the presser foot, lift up the needle, and place your project right underneath. Right over here, there is a little spot on the presser foot where you can actually see the fabric. So you want this mark to be right underneath the needle. When doing a curve on a serger, I stop and go quite often. While I do that, I lift up the presser foot and I readjust the project underneath it, so that way I can get a really nice curve without any jagged edges. As soon as you have reached the other notch, and you can see it right over here, lift up your presser foot, lift up the needle, pull the project away as much as you can, and then chain off. The name of this pattern piece is front. This part will belong to the toe area, so we want to place it like so, aligning at the curve. Now the heel, we actually want to open up like this, and while we're holding it, place the rest of the pattern piece over it. Have the heel facing sideways all the way flat, like so, and then let's start pinning all the way around. Now I actually prefer sewing from this side so I can clearly see how much of this heel am I catching. So if you'd like to, you can reposition your pins, and let's head to the serger. Here I'm going to start by removing the pin. I'm going to gently hold with my fingers this top part and very, very slightly pull the heel a little bit away, so that way I don't catch a lot of fabric in the seam. Otherwise, it will be quite chewed up in that area and uncomfortable. Now I'm going to place it underneath the presser foot and the needle, lower it, and start serging. Once you have reached this area, we're going to hold the top with our finger like so. We're going to take the heel and ever so slightly pull it away from the rest of the seam. Exactly the same thing that we did previously. And now we're going to serge over it. This is what you're going to have once done. Now grab one of the pattern pieces of a band, place the short ends together, and let's serge it. When we're done, we can give it a good press and then turn everything right side out. Now let's take the band and place it over the opening of the sock, and I personally like having this seam at the back, so at the center back, not at one of the other seams. I like it at the back. So place it over the opening like so, align it, and let's head to the serger. Here, we simply need to make sure that we catch all layers in one seam. So 2 layers of the band and 1 layer of the sock. And we're going to be serging it in the round. Now, tuck in the serger tail, and that's it. Your sock is done. Once you get your first pair down, you'll be making these in about 10 minutes, and it goes so quick and easy that your knit fabric scrap pile is definitely going to get smaller and smaller, and you're going to get really fun socks. For our next project, we're going to make something that many call unpaper towels. I have also seen many places start selling them, but why buy if you can actually make them yourself, right? And it's probably one of the most useful things that I have made for our home. Now, I made my first batch a few years back, and since then, we've been really using it every single day, mainly in the kitchen though, and we use it for everything. We use it to clean up messes, we use it as a towel or a napkin, we use it as something to grab onto when you need to lift up really hot cast iron skillet. As you know, the handle gets real hot. You can use it to put it underneath real hot plates when you transfer them to your table, or as a mug rug, and I'm pretty sure a dozen other uses that my family does, but I'm not aware of. So today we're going to make another batch together. Alright, let's talk about materials. Now, I like making my unpaper towels with 2 sides. On one side, I like using cotton. It can be quilting cotton, it can be craft cotton, just simple medium weight 100% cotton. Avoid using cotton polyester mixes or just plain polyester because it does melt when exposed to heat, and it's especially important when you're making something for the kitchen. Now, for the other side, I like using toweling. It can be terry cloth that you buy as a yardage from the store, or if you have a towel that you just don't use but it's still in great condition, you can also utilize it for this project. Each rectangle is cut to be about 12 by 7 inches, but you can of course decide on your own measurements depending on your needs. You can also see that I like to give mine rounded corners, and that's because it makes it a little bit easier to turn everything right side out instead of fiddling with regular corners. The first step is to take our pattern pieces and place these right sides together. If you need, you can go ahead and pin on the perimeter. However, I like for this kind of project to go pretty fast, so I only use 2 pins. I place these on one of the long sides about 3 inches apart. We will need to leave this part unsewn because this is how we're going to turn everything right side out. At the sewing machine, select a straight stitch and then slightly increase the stitch length so that way it's easier to go through all of this thick toweling. Starting with a back stitch, I'm going to start on the bottom of the opening that we have marked and make my way all the way around. I usually go for 3/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. There's no need for a really wide seam allowance. In fact, in this case, it will make your life a bit more difficult. Now, once you reach the other side of the opening, go ahead and backstitch, and at this point, we are ready to turn everything right side out. Reach your hand inside through the opening, pull everything out, and with rolling motions, roll out the rounded corners. Once you're done, give your towel a really good press all the way around. After that, grab the seam allowances of the opening, tuck them in so that way they form a straight line with the rest of the side, and then give those a really good press as well. Now at the sewing machine, we're going to top stitch all the way around. Once again, select a longer straight stitch to help you go through all of those layers. Start and end with a back stitch, and I usually stitch about 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of your project. Once you're done, give it another good press, and that's it, you are done. Now, I used to do a cross like this with a straight stitch to sort of quilt this everything together and keep both layers in place, but over the years I've found that it doesn't really fluff up too much in a wash, so it's totally an optional thing. I also don't think that it's necessary to add any sort of snaps or Velcro. I've seen some people do that in order to be able to connect these and then put them on a roll to give them an appearance of an actual paper towel. But in my experience, just fold them up like this, put them on the counter or in your kitchen drawer, and that's it. They're good to go. Now, I find that zippers can be a dreaded subject by many people. So with this next project, I invite you to come along. Let's practice your sewing skills and in the process, make a cute and useful zipper pouch. As always, I'll guide you step by step and I'll give you useful hints and tips so that way your project turns out in the best possible way. Now, when it comes to selecting fabrics for your pouches, I would stick to cotton. Medium weight cotton will do really well. You can go for something a little bit heavier as well. And of course, you can use other fabrics like linen and mixes. But I would say cotton is the most reliable, goes easy, and you probably already have some fabric scraps or some yardage in your stash. As you can see, I have already cut my fabric. We will need 4 rectangles, each measuring 6 inches by 10 inches. We will need 2 from the outer fabric and 2 from the lining. We will also need a smaller rectangle, just 1, measuring 4 inches by about 2.5. This project also involves a zipper. You can use any length zipper that's longer than 10 inches. Mine is about 10 inches and a half, and that will do. This is just a regular non-separating zipper that you will be able to find in almost any craft store. First, we're going to give this little piece a little bit of a press. Turn it wrong side up. Fold about 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch in on the long side. Give it a good press. We will repeat the same thing on the bottom. Fold in about 1/4 inch, 3/8 inch. Give it a good press. Then bring the edges together like so. Give it another press. After that, grab your scissors and cut about in the middle. There we go. Next, we need to grab our zipper. And we need to cut our zipper about 1 inch shorter than the long edge of our pouch. For me, that's actually right here after the metal parts at the beginning of the zipper and right here before the metal stopper on the end of the zipper. That's 9 inches from one end to another. For you, you will need to measure that. So what we're going to do is open the zipper about halfway through, and then I'm going to cut right after the metal stoppers right here and right before the metal stopper over here. Now we will need to take these parts and attach it to the zipper. What we're going to do is we're going to open it, place it like so, and pin. We're going to do it in 2 steps because I find that if you are a beginner, this is way easier than doing it all at once. And of course you can do it all at once if you so desire, but I find that sometimes an extra step makes it easier. This is what we have so far. Let's take it to the sewing machine. I find that it's easier and smoother if you increase the stitch length of your straight stitch because that way it will go smoother through the thick zipper. We're also going to start and end with a back stitch and we're using just a straight stitch. We're going to place our project underneath the presser foot and we're going to start stitching at the beginning of the zipper tape. Our goal is to stitch through the layer of the zipper and with a little tab underneath. So you need to catch the zipper and the fabric. Once you're done with one side, you're going to repeat the same on the other side. Now, if you do have a metal zipper, you want to make sure that instead of just sewing through it, you hand crank through it so that way you don't break your needle in the process. Next, let's enclose the raw edge of the zipper like so and stitch over this part one more time, this time catching all 3 layers, 2 layers of fabric and a zipper. Once again, we're using just a straight stitch with a back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and this is what you're going to have once done. Next, grab 1 rectangle of your outer fabric and 1 rectangle of your lining fabric and let's attach the zipper. Take your zipper with the zipper pull facing down, align it, center it, so that way from each edge you have about 1/2 inch left. And then pin. Next, take your lining, place it right side down, so looking at your outer fabric, like so. Align it at the edge and re-pin so that way you have a 3-layer sandwich. Leave your zipper about halfway unzipped. That way it will be easier for you to get the zipper pull out of the way as we're sewing it. At the sewing machine, switch out your all-purpose foot to a zipper foot and clip it into the left slot. Grab your project, and I like to align the edge of the zipper foot with the edge of the fabric. We're going to start with the back stitch, and once again with a straight stitch, we're going to sew from the top to bottom. Once you have reached the zipper pull, you can feel the bump over here. Leave the needle inside of your project, lift up your presser foot, reach inside and finagle the zipper pull out of the way, and then continue stitching all the way till the bottom. This is what we have so far. At this point, let's go ahead and snap these parts because we no longer need them. And now we're going to give it a good press. Open it up. First, we're going to press it on the side of the lining. Just a quick little press over here. Then flip it like so. Pull on the outer fabric just a little bit. And give it another press. Now we're going to top stitch from over here all the way till over here. I find that it works the best. And we're going to top stitch quite close to the edge of the fabric. Leaving the zipper foot in exactly the same position, we're going to start at the end of the zipper, so at the end part. And once again, I'm aligning this edge of the zipper foot now with this edge of the fabric. As always, don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and at the end. Now you're going to repeat all the same steps on the other side. To do that, open your zipper about halfway through, grab your outer fabric, place it right sides facing with the other outer fabric, like so, aligning at the top edge of the zipper and on the sides. Then grab your lining fabric, right side up, right sides facing with the other lining fabric, once again aligning at the sides and with the top edge of the zipper. Then pin, just like we did previously, from one edge to another edge, and follow all of the same steps. This is what we're going to have once done. Alright, the next step is to open the zipper, then take your outer fabric, bring it together like so, and place it on your working area. Now we want to make sure that the seam allowances right over here are pointing towards the direction of the lining. Then we align them and pin them, and you're going to feel a little bump over here. That's where the zipper is at. Then we want to pin all the way to one side and all the way to the other side. Now let's take it to the sewing machine. Here I have switched to our regular presser foot, and we're going to stitch once again with straight stitch with about 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, starting and ending with a back stitch. Once you get to the zipper part where the two fabrics connect, your presser foot will naturally want to lift up. So just slow and steady, go over it. Once completed, I like to give it a quick peek and double check that everything is sewn nice and neat. That's what we want. And now we can go ahead and do exactly the same steps on the other side. When both sides are sewn, now we need to sew the bottom of the outer fabric. So, just like previously, from one edge to the other with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, we're going to sew it shut. On the lining, I'm going to leave it as is because I prefer it this way. But you can also sew in a little bit here and on the other side and leave just a small opening for turning everything right side out. Now let's turn out the corners, and I personally don't like snipping into them, especially if it's a 90-degree angle, because it is a stress point. Instead, place your hand inside, and this is what we're going to do. Fold in one of the seam allowances, the side seam allowance in, then fold in the top seam allowance in, and now turn out the corner. You might need to help it out a bit with a rolling motion from your fingers, and that's it. You get a nice 90-degree angle. Next, turn the entire project right side out, however, leave the lining out like this. Next, grab it and with your fingers, fold the seam allowances in about 1/2 inch. So the seam allowances on the outer fabric were 3/8 of an inch, but here we're gonna do 1/2 inch, so that way it's not too bulky right there. Once you have folded them in, like so, give it a good press. For this next step, flip out the seam allowance and then trim it in half. Also, while you're at it, give a good rest to the rest of your project. At the sewing machine, using your straight stitch, we're going to sew extremely close to the edge, catching both layers of the lining. This is what it's going to look like once you're done. Now pop the lining inside, and that's it. Your pouch is ready. With the fear of zipper being behind you, let's tackle another quick and easy project that features a zipper, this time on a larger scale. You can definitely make this into your everyday bag, or perhaps a tote for groceries or market, or it could also be a really great idea for beach carry-all. Whichever way you want to go, you can definitely tailor this project to your particular needs. And here I have a couple of extra examples. Some are very recent, some I made quite a few years back, but I just wanted to show you some to ignite and spark your imagination and creativity. This is a smaller version, and I made it as a Christmas gift bag. There we go. And then we have another small version. This one is for a child, therefore all of these bright colors and a really fun print, and I love how happy it turned out. And this one, again following exactly the same principles and techniques that we're going to be doing together, is a white and blue version. So I hope this gave you quite a few ideas. So now let's talk about materials. Now first, of course, we have fabric. And I find that for these kind of projects, I really like using medium and heavyweight cottons. So for example, cotton canvas is a great choice. Also, if you have some denim scraps, you could combine them into a fun and interesting patchwork and then turn that into a tote. Also, heavyweight linen works great, so you have plenty of choices. Next, we're going to need a zipper because our tote has a pocket. After that, it's optional, but I do like the ease of these kind of bag straps. I'm saying optional because if you don't have any, but you really want to make a tote, of course you can make your own straps, but this just makes life a little bit easier, and you can buy them in a variety and in a majority of Sewing Notion shops. And after that, a little bit of interfacing. All right, now let me share with you how are we going to cut this in order to prepare our pattern pieces. For the top of the tote, we're going to cut 2 rectangles, and each is going to be 17 inches by 14. For the bottom of the tote, we will need to cut 1 rectangle, 17 inches by 10. But if you would like to make the bottom a little bit sturdier, you can also double up the fabric or interface it. For the pocket, I have a piece that is 8 by 11 inches, and then we will also need the straps. Each strap is going to be cut 54 inches long, and we're going to need 2 of those. First, we're going to take care of the pocket. So let's flip it over, and here from the top I have measured about 3 inches. Now we're going to cut it apart. Next, I have cut small strips of interfacing, and we're going to fuse it to the top part right over here on the wrong side of the fabric, and on both top and bottom of the smaller piece. Next, I like to finish the raw edges of the fabric of the interfaced parts. You can either do that on a sewing machine by using a zigzag stitch or an overcast stitch, or you can also do that on a serger, whichever one you prefer. Once done, this is what we're going to have. Next, let's go ahead and press these edges to the wrong side of the fabric. I'm going to be pressing it about 1/2 inch in. Next, it is time for the zipper. I'm just going to be using this regular white nylon zipper. Let me open this one first, and I'm going to place my pocket right in the middle, sort of in between this metal stopper and this metal stopper, because we will need to cut them off anyway. So I'm going to place it like so, and we can also pin it in place. Now, because we are going to be sewing through so many layers and through thick fabric, 2 things that you need to check. Number 1, what kind of needle you're using, so make sure that you're using appropriate size. And number 2, the stitch length. If you increase it, then it's going to go through a little bit easier through all of those layers and thickness of the fabric. Next, I switched to the zipper foot. And the first row of stitches I do quite close to the zipper itself. Don't forget to start and end with the back stitching. The second row of stitches is a little bit further away. For that, I switch to the other side of the zipper foot. I align it with the edge of the fabric right before the zipper teeth, and that serves as a really great guide to make sure that both of the lines are parallel. To achieve the same result on the top part of the pocket, we're going to take the top piece, place it on top, and then repeat all of the same steps. Now the pocket is mainly done. This is what we have from the right side, and this is how it looks from the inside, from the wrong side of the fabric. Next, let's interface and press the top hems of the tote. For that, you will need to grab both of the rectangles that measure 17 inches by 14 inches. If you're working with a directional print, make sure that it's placed in the right direction. Here I have cut my interfacing. It is about 1 inch wide, and I'm going to place it half an inch away from the top edge of this rectangle, and then we're going to fuse it. Next, I'm going to fold in this half an inch that we left and press it again. After this, I'm going to fold one more time right underneath where the interfacing ends, which was 1 inch. So there we go. If you'd like, you can use a hot press ruler, or you can also measure. But once you apply the interfacing, it's real easy because you can feel how to fold it, and the fabric will want to fold there by itself as well because those parts are thicker. Once all of the pressing is done, we will need to repeat all of the same steps on the other rectangle as well. On this one though, I did one additional thing. I created a crease. So I folded this in half and then gave it a really good press with my iron. And you will see why in a few steps, but you don't have to repeat this part on the other rectangle. Now grab the pocket, fold it in half like this as well, and give it a good crease, just like we did on that one pattern piece. There we go. I find that these creases are an easy way how to align the center of the pocket with the center of the tote. So here's one crease, here's the other one. Place it one on top of another, like so. And now we can top stitch the top of the pocket. To keep everything uniform, I'm actually sticking to my zipper foot for this step as well. First, just like on the pocket, I'm going to do a row of stitching that's close to the edge. For the second one, I'm going to switch the sides of the zipper foot, and that is going to give me a nice parallel row of stitching that is going to be exactly the same as we did when we installed the zipper. Since we don't need these little parts of the zipper, we can snip these off, as well as any of the loose threads on each of the sides. Next, let's grab the handles. I like to place them in the way so that the middle of the strap aligns with the edge of the pocket. You can of course use a ruler and make sure that everything is quite precise and neat. Once I have pinned the straps in place, I also double check that each one of them is an equal distance from the edge of the tote. Next, we're going to stitch them down. We will do 2 rows, one on each side, over here and over here, all the way to the top. Here I would like to highlight that any time that you're stitching over a zipper, please be very careful. Now nylon zippers like the one that I'm using here are quite easy to stitch over, especially if they're very small. But if you're using a metal zipper, please make sure that you stop before the zipper and then hang crank while you go over it in order to avoid the breakage of the needle or any other unpleasant situations. Once the straps are attached, it will enclose the pocket and the zipper of the pocket. So now it's almost fully functioning apart from the bottom. And from the wrong side of the garment, this is what you're going to have. To attach the straps to the other side of the tote, I like to place the one that we just finished to the bottom of the one that we need to do it. So on this side, I have the top hem. There we go. Then grab the straps. Place them like so, making sure that everything is mirrored, and then attach them exactly the same way as we did previously. After attaching straps to both sides of the tote, let's focus on the bottom part. I did double up the bottom part, so we're just going to treat it as one piece of fabric. Let's place it the right sides together with the top of the tote, like so, aligning on the bottom edge. Now let's go ahead and sew it with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance with a straight stitch first. After this, I'll finish up the raw edge with the serger. For this next step, let's go ahead and give this part a really good press, folding the bottom part away and pressing really well, because next we're going to top stitch it, and we're going to use the same zipper foot as we did on the pocket. So 2 rows of stitching. 1 row of stitching is going to be on the very edge of the fold and the other one parallel to it. Please note that I'm still using my zipper foot for this step because it's just so easy and convenient to achieve a nice and even result. After that is done, all we have to do is repeat the same on the other side of the tote. Now when both of the parts are attached to the middle piece, it is time to sew the sides. For that, let's bring the long edges right sides together. Also make sure to unfold the top hems and also make sure that the other seams align. After that, let's sew it with a straight stitch first with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then we will finish the raw edges. Here I'm actually going to make 1 more crease, this time right here on the bottom, and this is going to help us with boxing out the corners. To do that, take the tote, open up, and align this crease with this seam. Then press with your fingers and pin. Place it flat on the table so that way we can mark a straight line. I like to do about 5 inches across, so 2.5 inches on each side of the seam. And this is going to be our stitching line, so let's get that done. As always, we will do this exactly the same way on the other corner as well. When bottom is done, the last step is to finish the top hem. This one is an easy one since it's already pressed and folded, and all we have to do is top stitch it. 1 row, as always, will go on the very edge and the other one about 1 inch away to catch the bottom of the hem. Now the last thing to take care of before we're done is this little corner, and here I see 3 options. Option number 1, we can fold it towards the bottom and then stitch it down. Option number 2, we can cut off the extra of this little triangle and then finish the raw edges on a serger or on a sewing machine. And option number 3, we can fold it up and then stitch it down as well. After that, that's it, your tote is ready. And I truly hope that this project helped you put together not only the skills that we've learned, but also some of the fabric scraps and fabric remnants as well. And a fun fact, I made a couple of these totes as gifts and it was a great success. Next, let's go back to the knit fabric scraps and do a very useful project for which we're going to be creating a pattern by copying it from an existing garment. First, grab a pair of underwear that you would like to copy, and then of course your tracing paper, your printer paper, your pattern paper, whatever you have available, grab that and let's get started. I'm going to take my undies, place them on the tracing paper, and I'm going to outline the back pattern piece first. Now these are the ones that I made myself, and here I used underwear elastic that slightly extends past the finished edge of the garment. But my goal right now is to outline the true edge. So I'm gonna go in and I'm actually going to correct my pattern ever so slightly to reflect that. Same would be true for underwear with elastic like this. If your undies have a gusset, mark the placement of it on your pattern as well. Now I like to cut the square around my traced pattern, fold it in half, and then make sure that both sides are symmetrical, and then cut it out. Next, I'm going to trace the front pattern piece, but this time I'm going to place my pattern paper on top. Here I'm going to fill the outline of the pattern piece with my fingers and then use my pencil in order to trace it. Don't forget to mark the placement of the gusset on the front pattern piece as well. From here, I do all of the same steps that I do for the back pattern piece. The only difference is that I don't cut it out just yet, and I don't outline it in marker as well. Now in this case, I did outline it in green marker so that way you can see it a little bit better, but usually I just leave it in pencil at this very moment. Next, I'm going to grab my back pattern piece, and I need to make sure that certain elements align. First, we want to place them like this, front on top, back on the bottom, and we want to make sure that this creates a really nice smooth line on both sides. And as you can see, it doesn't, so we need to adjust it. Now we want to make sure that the side seams also match in length, and they also create a really nice and smooth transition in this particular place. I'm going to make sure that the curve of the side seam is the same on front and the back pattern piece, and since my side seam is curved, I'm going to align the curve right here on the bottom and then check this transition. Usually the back pattern piece is also a little bit higher than the front pattern piece, and here you can see that as well. Now that I have adjusted everything that I need to, I can finalize my front pattern piece. As always, I want to make sure that both sides are symmetrical and even. And after that, I usually go ahead and cut it out. As a final step, I took my front pattern piece and my back pattern piece and placed them together at the gusset, and then I taped them. Then I also traced the gusset on a separate piece of pattern paper. After that, I marked my pattern pieces so that way I know that there's no seam allowances, the direction of the stretch, and then on my gusset I clearly identified where's the front and where's the back. Now when prepping my fabric, first of all, it is already washed, and then I identified the greatest direction of the stretch and placed my pattern accordingly. Since my pattern is without any seam allowances, I'm going to be cutting it out, adding 1/4 of an inch on all sides. After the pattern is cut, I also make sure to mark the positioning of the gusset on the front pattern piece with 2 little notches, one on each side. Speaking of the gusset, we will need to cut one of those as well. Now when it comes to undies, there are so many things that you can use and so many different sewing tools and sewing notions. But in this particular video, I would love to show you 2 methods, and from there you can pick and choose which one you like better. First step, no matter what technique I'm going to be using, is to attach a gusset to the main pattern piece. For that, I'm going to place it wrong side up, and I'm going to take my gusset, place it wrong side up as well. Here are the 2 little notches that I have made on my pattern. I'm going to place the gusset 1/4 of an inch lower than those marks, pin, and then sew straight across from one mark to another mark using a lightning stitch. For this, you can also use just a simple zigzag stitch as well. And here I'm sewing with white thread so that way you can see it a little bit better. Once done, this is what you're going to have. And here I like to give it a really good press this way, then fold my gusset down and then give it another really good press. For this first technique, I'm going to be using underwear elastic, and for those who are wondering where to get some for a good price, I will leave a link for you in the description of this video. Now I'm going to be attaching this elastic in 2 steps. First step is going to be placing elastic like so, and then attaching it with a zigzag stitch, stretching it just the slightest amount. Now, important part to note is that I'm starting to attach this elastic 1 inch away, and then I'm also going to finish it 1 inch before the end of the seam. Once that is done, I'm going to continue by sewing a side seam, and for this one I'm going to use a lightning stitch. And one of the reasons why I like using lightning stitch on knit fabrics is because that is the only stitch that can actually press open the seam allowances and create less bulk. Once the side seam is sewn, now I'm going to grab the loose ends of the elastic, overlap them, and then attach them using the same technique as before. Of course, don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and at the end of every seam that you're doing. Now that the elastic is attached in the round, we can go ahead, fold it under, and here you have that beautiful little edge of the elastic, and we can secure it by using a 3-step zigzag stitch and sewing right on top. Now you can also use just a regular zigzag, but I do find that a 3-step zigzag puckers knit fabrics less and also stretches them and distorts them less in the process, therefore it makes a better result in the end. After being done with one side, I'm going to repeat all of the same steps for the other side. And after that, we're on to finishing the elastic on the top. And here I'm going to use exactly the same 2-step sequence. The only difference is that I'm going to cut my elastic about 1 inch shorter so that way I can stretch it a little bit as I sew it in. But don't forget that you need a little bit extra to overlap it at the side seam. And here is the final result. Now keep in mind there are so many ways how you can sew undies, and this is just one of many. Now let me turn this wrong side out so that we can see some of the details, like for example, pressed open seams, the overlap of the elastic, and also the gusset. For the second technique, the first few steps are absolutely the same, but instead of finishing the leg opening with the underwear elastic, I simply turn the hem allowance 1/4 inch under and then stitched it down with a 3-step zigzag. In return, it creates a beautiful little scalloped hem. The trick in order to create a little scalloped hem like this is to make sure that every top of a 3-step zigzag triangle actually falls off of the fabric and doesn't pierce it at all. That will in turn create the little scallops. Now I've done a full separate video on interesting zigzag stitch techniques, and this one is described there in detail. Therefore, I will leave a link for that video in the description, so that way if you want, you can take a look. If after completing your hem, your fabric is slightly wavy, don't worry. Usually giving it a good press before moving on to the next step will do the job. After that, the next step is to complete the side seam. Now here, since I didn't use any underwear elastic, it doesn't really matter which stretch stitch I'm going to be using. To complete the top of the undies, I'm going to be following exactly the same steps as in the previous technique. And that's it. Let's take a look at the final result. Let's stay on the topic of knits for one more project. This time, grab the smallest of the knit fabric scraps that you have. You can even combine different prints together, and we're going to be making really fun scrunchies that have a surprise on the edge. They have a beautiful visible seam done on the serger, so we're going to be practicing a new technique. Now don't worry, if you don't have a serger, you can still make these on a sewing machine as well, and choose a fun stitch that you can put on the edge that would add a little bit of intricacy and a little bit of to your project. You can choose a solid color or a pattern that would suit you, or go for something fun and colorful for the little ones. It's also a great scrap buster. And if you take a look on the very edge, you will see that we have an exposed seam, which in turn is sort of like the secret element that allows us to construct this entire scrunchie on serger only without involving a sewing machine. So now let's talk about what we're going to need. First, elastic. And no matter how I make my scrunchies on a sewing machine or on a serger, I like to use wide elastic. It's about 3/8 of an inch wide, or about 1 centimeter. And in this case, I'm gonna cut it to about 8.5 inches or 21 centimeters. When it comes to fabric, you can use both woven or you can use knits. Just use whatever you have. And in this case, it's not even one solid piece of fabric. It's just all little pieces pieced together because that's what I had. Now, the length of my fabric is going to be approximately, I would say, 32 inches or so, or 82 centimeters. When it comes to the width, I would say between 3 to 4 inches, which would be between 7.5 and about 10 centimeters. The first thing that we need to do is to join the ends of our fabric. So grab your fabric like this, place it right sides together at the short ends, and that's where we're going to sew. And we're going to do that on our serger using a 4-thread, just a basic 4-thread serger technique. Once done, you're going to have a loop like this. And if you're working on multiple scrunchies like I am, then go ahead and complete the same task on all of them. Once that is done, next we need to join our elastic in a loop as well. And we're also going to do that on a serger. The first thing that we need to do is to overlap it by about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters. I also find that pinning it in this direction does help keep it all together once we start serging. Here at the serger, make sure that you disengage the knife. Yours might be as easy as pushing a button, or like mine, you can manually turn it down. Then take your elastic and you want to place it underneath your presser foot about 1/2 inch before your overlap starts. So place it very carefully underneath your presser foot, lower it. At this point, I like to remove the pin that holds it all together. And now we're going to start serging it.
Once you're about half an inch past the overlap, go ahead and chain off and then snip it off. And you're going to repeat exactly the same thing on the other side. Then you can tuck in your serger tails, and after that you're going to have a joined elastic that is still stretchy, everything as it should be, but this time it was done on a serger instead of a sewing machine. Now we're ready to grab our fabric and grab our elastic. So I find that it's easier if you hold your elastic like this, then you take your fabric, bring the fabric through the elastic, bringing the wrong sides together like so, and then pin it. But we're not going to pin it all the way around because I find it unnecessary and also very time consuming. We're just going to pin this very little bit at the beginning point. Here I'm going to give you a couple of options. So let's say you're feeling adventurous, but you want to start by dipping in your toe, so just a little bit, not too difficult. Then I would say the easiest way to go about it would be to leave everything as is. So right now we have it set up for a regular 4-thread serging. The stitch finger is in, everything is in, so as it would normally be. And the only thing that we're going to change is stitch length. So from 3, which would be a normal setup for my serger, I'm gonna go down to R. In your case, you want to decrease it to one of the smallest amounts. That will pack the stitches close together, which in turn is going to create a really nice and beautiful edge on our scrunchies. Make sure that you bring the blade back up. Grab our scrunchie where we have pinned it together. Place it underneath the presser foot, lower the presser foot, take out the pin, and start serging. Once you have reached a point where you don't have all the fabric aligned together, go ahead, reach in, grab more fabric, place it together like so, pinch it with your fingers, and continue serging. When you are approaching the overlap with the start of the seam, let's go ahead and snip off the tail, like so. Stretch out this part just a little bit so that way it's nice and flat. Here you want to be really careful. You want to overlap the seam, I would say by about half an inch or so, but you don't want to cut anything off with a knife. Once you got that, continue serging while very gently pulling the scrunchie away from the serger. And then snip it off. Next, just tuck in the thread tail and that's it, you're done. There's something really fun about these serger scrunchies, especially about that little pop of color on the edge. And here you can experiment with different threads. And in my case, I love using variegated thread because, you know, I think it just adds a little bit of interest, but you can also use just a solid color as well. And if you're looking for which thread is going to show up the most, then that would be your upper looper thread. That's what you see right here in the green. Now, as I mentioned, here we have a couple of options. For those who are more adventurous, we are going to make a couple of adjustments. And the first one is going to be by removing the left needle. Once the needle is out, let's also remove the cone that goes with that needle. And these particular settings of this next one are sort of my own variation between a 3-thread serging and a rolled hem. It's sort of like a little hybrid, because in my case, I'm working with a knit that's not light, and especially 2 layers of it don't really respond well to a traditional rolled hem. With traditional rolled hem, the thinner the fabric, the easier for serging it is to roll it. So I find that in this particular case, I leave the stitch finger in, as opposed in traditional rolled hem, you would take the stitch finger out. So we leave the stitch finger as is. Then we increase the tension of the right needle. In my case, I'm going to take it all the way up to 7. We'll leave the upper looper as is. For me, that's usually at 4. And we will also increase the lower looper, and I'm gonna take it all the way to number 9. But as always, feel free to experiment and see what gives you the best result. The stitch length is also going to remain at R, or the lowest number that you have on your serger. And from here, you're going to repeat all of the same steps as we did for the previous scrunchie. If you look at these side by side, you can see that on the orange scrunchie, the edge is narrower, but also the color that we inserted in the upper looper loops all the way around to the other side instead of being just on one side as in the green example. And overall, I hope that this showed you that you can experiment, that you can have fun, that you can make your own iterations of these serger techniques that we discussed in the original serger series. Now, if you are interested in seeing the original episodes of the series, you can either find them on my channel, or I can also leave them for you guys in the description of this video. Each episode tackles a very simple but very useful serger technique. We go into problem solving, troubleshooting, adjustments. Everything is step by step, so that way you can truly have success with your serger and discover all of the things that it can do. Alright, next we are going to be making these adorable bunnies. You can make these as home decor, you can make these as a gift, and even as a project for your craft group. But first you will need to print out a template. Now this template is available in the description of this video, and usually I make these for the members of the channel, but this time this one is available for everybody. So as I mentioned, the link will be in the description of this video. You can see that there's 2 pattern pieces, so let's go ahead and cut these out right on the black line. The next step is to decide what fabric you want to use, and you can use whatever fabric scraps that you have, but I particularly like how linen gives that rustic feel and look to these little bunnies, so that's what I'm gonna go with. Now, take 2 fabric scraps that are large enough for your template, plus a little bit extra since the seam allowances are not included. Place one on top of another, and then take the template, place it like so. I like to align the cross grain of the fabric with the bottom of the bunny and pin it. You can also leave it as that, whichever is easier. Grab a marking tool. In my case, I'm using a darker marker that is water soluble. In your case, you will use something a little bit lighter. And let's go ahead and outline this. Now, let's remove the template and still pin the 2 layers of fabric like so, and you can also insert a little pin over here, maybe here and here. Now we want to stitch from the bottom all the way around right on the marking line and all the way here, leaving this bottom line unsewn. Next, let's head to the sewing machine. We're going to be using a regular straight stitch, but I like to decrease the stitch length. I find it easier to work with that, especially when we're going to be reducing and clipping seam allowances later. Because we have so many curves, you will see that I often stop, leave the needle inside of the project, lift up the presser foot, and pivot in the direction that I need to go. As always, we're going to start with the back stitch and end with the back stitch as well. This is what we have right now. Next step is to cut everything out, leaving about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance away from the seam itself. And we're going to do it all the way around. However, right here on the bottom, as you can see, I left 1/2 inch seam allowance. Next, I'm going to grab smaller scissors and I'm going to clip in all of the corners, almost all the way up to the stitch line, but not through it. So that way we don't clip through the thread itself. And then I'm also going to grade the seam allowances as well. Any curved areas, let's go ahead and give it a couple of notches so that way it will turn out a little bit better. At this point, it's also helpful if we fold this 1/2 inch in, and here you can either finger press it or, depending on your fabric, give it a press with an iron as well. And I'm going to do that on the other side as well. Now we can go ahead and turn it right side out. Using the rolling motion of your fingertips definitely helps when you're working through all of those curves. At this point, if your fabric allows it, it's a good idea to give it a press. After that, let's grab stuffing, fluff it up a little bit, and then fill it in. When done, we have one last thing to do. Grab the smaller pattern piece, place it on a scrap piece of fabric, trace it around, and then cut it out, giving yourself about 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. Additionally, I do like giving it a stitch right on the traced line on the sewing machine. I just find that it's really useful when we go ahead and sew it in. Here we will also need to clip in the seam allowances. This time I'm not going to grade them, I'm going to leave them as is, and I'm going to clip all the way around, almost to the stitching line but not through. To fold these seam allowances towards the wrong side of the fabric, what I usually do, I simply place the template back right in the middle, grab an iron, and then while folding these to the middle, I give it a good press. The pattern piece is small, so just make sure that you watch your fingers as you're doing this. To attach the bottom, I'm going to grab a hand sew needle and thread, and then I'm going to grab the bottom piece, and this part right over here, I am going to place it right in the middle of the seam of the bottom of the bunny. Then insert the needle, pull it through, and then continue stitching all the way around using a blanket stitch. You can of course finagle a little bit and do this on a sewing machine as well, but because pattern pieces are so small, I prefer doing it by hand. I find it goes much neater and faster. Now you can fluff it up a little bit, like so, and also test it out. Your bunny should be able to stand on its own. The last and final part is to make a little ribbon to go around the neck of the bunny. You can use already made ribbon, or you can cut your own from a piece of fabric that you have. Then simply tie it around the neck, and that's it. You are done. Now this next project might be able to save you quite a bit of money in the makeup and beauty aisle. So we're going to be working today on reusable cotton rounds. Those are to remove makeup from your face, but by using exactly the same technique and just changing up the size and the shape, you can transform this into burp cloths, into cleaning rags, and also into unpapered towels. So definitely plenty of room to get creative and to use up whatever materials you have. In terms of fabric, we're going to need cotton toweling, and you can use the towels that you already have at home. Perhaps you have one too many, or you can also buy full yardage from the fabric store. And for the other side of the cotton rounds, I like to use just plain cotton fabric. Now that's my personal preference. If you find that you use both sides of your cotton rounds, then you can just sandwich two sides of the cotton toweling together. So it's definitely up to you. Since the circle is the star of the shape for the video today, let's start by cutting circles out of toweling and out of cotton fabric. You can use any measurements that you find appropriate, but you can find the measurements that I use on your screens right now. And today we have another for this next step, we actually have two options of serging that circle. We are going to learn how to serge a perfect circle, you take your cotton, and how to place these wrong sides together, like this, and you're going to find this technique really useful. For the other option, we're actually going to mark but also in a lot of different serger applications as well, and then you cut it out. So first, we're going to start with a simpler one. At the serger, we're going to stay with a regular 4-thread technique, the one that you're going to use for most of your serger needs. The only thing to keep in mind is that toweling is quite brittle, so oftentimes it is going to shed. So in order to prevent that, since here the serger seam is going to be exposed, you might want to decrease your stitch length. For me, it's this knob right over here, and I will go from 3 down to 2. Start by chaining off and creating a serger tail. Then, I prefer placing the toweling down on the feed dogs. Place it right underneath your presser foot. And it is going to get a little bit tight because it is quite thick, so you might want to bring up the presser foot a little bit higher and then lower it. Now the circle is small and the fabric, as I mentioned, is thick, so I prefer having both hands like this, so that way we can control it better. And now let's start serging. As you can see, I'm only cutting off just the tiniest bit with a serger knife, and I'm moving the circle and turning it as I serge. Sometimes you also might experience that the edges of your circle come out a little wavy. That can usually be remedied very easily with just a really nice press, or by increasing the differential feed on your serger. So in my case, going from 1
up to 2. As soon as you start getting closer to the beginning of our seam, we're gonna go over just about 1/2 inch or so. While we're doing that, we're trying not to cut off any of the edges of the existing seam because we don't want it to come undone. Once done, go ahead, lift up the needles, lift up the presser foot, pull the project a little bit away, then lower the presser foot and chain off. Now all you have to do is just tuck in this tail and you're good to go. In the first example, we didn't really cut off anything of our circle. In the second one, we're going to be using this cutout and we're going to be cutting away 1/4 inch as we serge around. This cutout is going to let us get a really nice smooth start and smooth finish. We want to place the cutout right underneath the needles and then lower your presser foot. I like to have the edge of the cutout right here at the knife. Now you're going to be rotating the circle as you serge, but at the same time, you will also need to make sure that you cut off an even amount on all sides, about 1/4 inch. I also find that because of that, I stop and go, lift up the presser foot and then lower it a lot more often than I did in the first option. Once you get to the beginning of the seam, you're simply going to do all the same steps as we did in the first example. Now personally, I find this second option a lot more cumbersome, but sometimes we do need to cut off the edge for whatever reason, and making that little cut really helps to get a smooth start and smooth end. I'm not sure if you know this, but pattern drafting and clothes design is definitely a topic that I absolutely love, and I love everything about sewing, but that particular niche is something that is true and dear to my heart, that's calling my name, and on this channel, that's primarily what I do, pattern drafting and clothes design, and I have over 500 videos on that topic. So with this next project, I would love to entice you a little bit and open the door into that world. And I would love to share with you how you can take a ready-to-wear t-shirt, store-bought, which most of you probably have. You can simplify it and then turn it into a really useful template for a lot of your future projects. And it's going to look very similar to the one that I'm wearing right now. So it's grown-on sleeve, and you can use the same method for both kids and adults. To get started, we're going to need just 3 simple things. Now, first, of course, you're going to need a t-shirt that fits you well, so grab that. Then some sort of paper that you can work on. In my case, this is a medical tracing paper. I will leave a link for you guys in the description, but you can also use taped together printer sheets, old newspapers if you have some, or anything else that you have available. And then a simple marking tool like a pencil. I'm going to start by measuring how much paper I need to work with and then cutting off anything extra. Next, I'm going to neatly fold these in half, the t-shirt and the paper. Please note that here I'm working with my t-shirt right side out instead of wrong side out. I find it much easier to do it this way since you can always add necessary seam allowances after you have drafted the outline of your pattern. I am placing side seam to side seam, hem to hem, shoulder seam to shoulder seam, and sleeve to sleeve. If you'd like, you can also add a couple of pins to hold everything together, but please be mindful that sometimes pins might leave marks. Now take your paper with the fold of the paper facing this way, and take your folded t-shirt and align them like so, fold on top of the fold. First thing that I'm going to do is simply make the outline of the side seam, the bottom hem, the shoulder seam and the sleeve all as one. And right here at the neckline, we're also going to make a marking, but not here where the ribbing of the neckline ends, but here where it meets the seam of the bodice. And we're going to do the same on this side as well. We want to mark the connection point between the neckline and the bodice. Now I'm going to lift up the t-shirt, and first I'm actually going to outline this in black so that way you can see a little bit better, but you don't have to do this in your case. To draft in the neckline from the point that we have marked earlier, take a straight perpendicular line like so, and from this point take a straight line down like this. Now you're going to make a beautiful curved line, and this is going to be your front neckline. Now this is what I have as of right now, and this could actually do pretty okay, but we're going to make a few minor adjustments to make it a little bit better for a grown-on sleeve. I am simply going to bring that shoulder seam a little bit higher up, and perhaps shorten it as well. Now let me redraft the sleeve, and I'll tell you by how much I lifted up that shoulder line. So from this point to this point, the distance is about 1 inch. This is going to give your sleeve a little bit more room, especially when you're going to be working with fabrics with only one-way stretch. Please note that this is a 90-degree angle. If some of your other lines are a little bit shaky, let's go ahead and tidy these up. After that is done, your front pattern piece is ready. Now we only have to mark that this is front. You're going to cut 1 on fold, and you can mark this as the fold line. What makes it really simple is that a lot of times in kids apparel, especially when it comes to very simple garments, the front and the back are nearly identical, and the only difference is the neckline. So basically, once you're done with one pattern piece, you automatically have the other pattern piece, and all you have to do is to adjust the neckline, and that's it. To get started on the back pattern piece, I'm going to flip this over and transfer all of the new markings that I have made on the other side of my tracing paper. This is currently the neckline of the front pattern piece. I'm going to take my t-shirt, I'm going to align it with the bottom hem and everything else, and the front of the neckline as well. And then I'm going to mark the connection point between the back pattern piece and the back neckline. Then we're going to do the same as we did before. We're going to take a straight perpendicular line and a line down from this point. After that, a nice curved line to make the new back neckline. This is going to be back. You're going to cut 1 on fold. To finish this up, if you wish, you can add your seam allowances to your paper pattern. Now in my case, I choose to do that as I cut my fabric, and usually for knits, I add either 3/8 of an inch seam allowance or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, which is just enough to form a serger seam or a zigzag stitch on a sewing machine. You will need to add your seam allowances on the shoulder seam, on the neckline, and on the side seam. And then on the sleeve and on the bottom hem, you will need to add hem allowances. And I usually do about 1 inch. After seam allowances and hem allowances are marked on one side, of course, you're going to copy them on the other side. And that's it, we're ready to cut the paper pattern out, get the fabric, and start working on the actual garment. To make sure that my hem allowances are correct, I usually fold the hem of the sleeve like so, and then double check. And if I need to add a little bit of extra, I can always place a piece of paper and then outline that curve that I missed when I was marking my seam allowances. Now, if I have a curve like this, most likely I will get rid of it by shortening the hem allowance, so that way I don't have to deal with it. There we go, much better. And don't forget that we're going to repeat the same on the other pattern piece as well. To make sure that we cut our fabric correctly, let's mark the direction of the stretch, which is going to be horizontal. The grain of the pattern is on the center front and center back right here at the fold line. Last time we went to the fabric store, my daughter picked up this really cute strawberry print, and I think that's what we're going to use. And remember, since we copied the garment that is made out of knit fabric, that's exactly what our new pattern is made for as well. Knits with two-way stretch or one-way stretch. As you can see, this particular fabric stretches really well in both directions. First, I'm going to find a selvage. Here it is. Then I'm going to bring it in like that, creating a fold. that's where I'm going to place one of my pattern pieces. Let me straighten this out. And then I'll grab my pattern piece and place the fold on the fold, like so. I can now pin it in place and cut it out. I find that I have to remind myself not to add anything as I cut because I usually don't mark seam allowances on my patterns, but I add them as I cut my fabric. Here obviously we already marked them on the pattern, so I find that I have to remind myself as I'm going around. Once we're done with cutting one pattern piece, we're going to repeat all the same steps for the other one as well. So now we have the front and the back. Now I am ready to put this together. The first step for me would be to take my front pattern piece, open this up, then take my back pattern piece, open this up as well, and place them right sides facing. Align them at the shoulder seams and pin it. These are the first two seams that we're going to do. If you have a sewing machine, use a sewing machine. If you have a serger, use a serger. Here I'm going to be using my sewing machine and I'm going to be stitching these seams with a wide zigzag stitch, starting with a small back stitch and ending with a small back stitch as well. Please remember that you need to stitch within the seam allowance that you have marked on your pattern. Sometimes, depending on a knit, when you sew it with a sewing machine, you might get a slightly wavy seam. Now, increasing this stitch width does help with that. But also, if the wave is not too big, we can press it out with an iron. While we're at it, we're going to press two more things: the hem of the sleeve and the hem on the bottom. First, I'm going to place my garment like so. This is the front, this is the back, and I want this seam allowance to be facing towards the back, and I'm going to give it a really good press. Then, whatever was the hem allowance on the sleeve, I'm going to fold it and press it. I will do the same on the bottom hem as well. Now I am ready to sew the side seams. Let's go ahead, place the garment like so. We're going to open up all of the hems that we just pressed. So I'm opening the bottom hem, placing the pattern pieces right sides together, and I will do the same on the sleeve as well. In my case, I've pinned them together, so I'm unpinning, placing them together, and this is how we're going to sew it. As you sew, don't be afraid to stop and adjust your presser foot in the direction in which you're sewing, especially when you're going around the curves. Once you're done with the side seams, you will notice that the hems will want to fold up on their own, and that's exactly what we wanted to achieve, because now you don't have to press in around, but instead your hems are ready to be hemmed. Now, there are multiple ways how you can finish hems on knits using your regular sewing machine, but one of my preferred methods is to do a blind hem stitch. For that, you will need to fold your hem just like you see me do on a screen, and then change your presser foot for a blind hem presser foot. Select a blind hem stitch, and then of course, complete the hem. When the bottom hem is done, let's finish up the hem on the sleeves. Here you can use the same method, however in my case they are quite small in the circumference, so I find it easier and quicker to finish them up by hand. The last and final step is to finish up the neckline. Now here I do have a really detailed tutorial on how to sew really neat knit necklines with all the tips and tricks and suggestions, so I will leave it for you in the description. But in a nutshell, it's about 2 inches wide. As for the length, it is about 80 to 85% of the total length of the front and the back necklines combined. It does depend on how stretchy is your knit. Next, I want to mark the center back and center front either with a little marking tool or with a notch. After that, we're going to place the neckband right sides together and sew it at the center back seam. If you choose a lightning stitch on your sewing machine to do it, it will be easier because then you can press that seam open. Now we can fold the neckband wrong sides together, forming a loop. I also like to find the center front, which is opposite the center back, and mark that with a notch as well. Now take the center front, place it like so, align it with the center front of your garment and pin it. I will do the same with the center back. After that, I'm going to stitch in the neckline, stretching it as I go. Just like with the side seams, I'm going to be doing that with a wide zigzag stitch. After your neckline is in, if your fabric allows it, give it a really good press with the seam allowance looking down, so towards the body of the garment. And that's it, you are done. Now, wasn't that quick and easy, right? So I truly hope that this will encourage you to give it a try as well. And for this last project of this video, we're going to be making something really fun and very simple. Now, infinity scarves can be made from a variety of different fabrics, and they're really great for using up those larger remnants that you might have. Here you see one in lightweight and drapey woven. I have here one from really nice fluffy knit. Here's one from an open work knit. So as you can see, they're all different, smaller and bigger, but the main characteristic of an infinity scarf is that it forms a loop. There are different ways how you can make that loop, even double it up and twist it, but today I'll show you the simplest version, and from there you can experiment. As always, fabric comes first, so here I have remnants of faux sherpa that we're going to piece together and make my infinity scarf, but you can choose whatever fabric that you would like. To determine the length of the scarf and how much fabric I need, I usually just take a measuring tape, I wrap it around, and I see what's going to be enough, where I want that scarf to end, how I want it to drape. Here, let's just go for the entire length of the measuring tape, and that is about 60 inches or 150 centimeters. When it comes to the width of the scarf, it does depend on the effect that you want to create and also on the fabric that you're using. So here, I'm using a really fluffy material, so I really don't want it to be that wide. And I think if we aim for maybe 14 inches or 12 inches, that would be enough, but I'll need to see what kind of remnants I have. And if we fold it in half, because that's what we're going to do when we're gonna sew the scarf, it's gonna be this wide. But if we take a look at this lightweight scarf, you can see that the width is much larger. And that's because the material itself is really thin, but it does compact. As you can see from the remnants that I had, I managed to cut 3 rectangles, and then I pieced them together in order to make one long piece of fabric. So let's go ahead and measure and see what do I have over here. Lengthwise, oh, you know what? It is nearly 60 inches, it's 59 inches, so that's perfect. And then width-wise, it's about 10 inches. Not necessarily the measurement that I was going for, but it will work. The order of sewing is really easy. First, we're going to start by sewing the long sides. So we're going to bring our scarf like this, right sides facing, and that's where we're going to sew the long edge. But we're not going to start at the very corner. We're actually going to step away about 5 inches, and we're going to do the same on the other side as well. Next, let's pin it all the way to the other side of the scarf, and now let's sew it. Now you can use a sewing machine, a serger, or even hand sew it if you would like, but for projects like these, I really do love using my serger. The fabric that you chose for this project is going to dictate what stitch to use on your sewing machine. A zigzag is great for knits, and straight stitch is great for wovens. When we're done, we're going to have this long sausage with open ends like this on both sides. So now we have to turn it right side out. So I'm going to stick my hand and I'm going to turn it. There we go. Now bring the open ends together like this. Make sure that it's facing the right direction. Place them right sides together and let's pin them. Once done, we will sew them exactly the same way as we did in step number 1. After this, all we have to do is turn it in and close by hand this opening. For that, we're going to turn in the raw edges of the fabric towards the inside. We're going to pinch and hold it with our fingers. Grab a hand sewing needle and thread. You can of course do that on the sewing machine as well, but I do find that fluffy knits like this one actually take hand sewing really well. So again, as always, it does depend on the fabric that you're going to be using. In my case, I went with a very simple blanket stitch. When the opening is closed, that's it, your scarf is ready. So right now, let's try it on. Well, there you have it. We made an infinity scarf. For more projects, click right over here. And I thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy, thoughtful sewing. Bye!